Excellent. Right, so a warm welcome, Scott, and thanks very much for agreeing to do one of the sessions in the Talk to the Hiring Manager. You know, we've had a lot of great feedback on Munir's presentation and a lot of interest in Public Health Scotland. So, you know, thanks for your time today, and over to your good self.
Thanks very much, Joanna. So no, it's really great to be here, and thanks for asking me. And I compared notes with Maria just to check what she'd covered, so we don't end up repeating the same stuff. But there'll be some stuff that we'll repeat because it's all kind of relevant. So it's great to be here. And what I thought I would do is I'm probably going to talk for about half an hour or thereabouts, but I can talk for Scotland, so don't hold me to that if I go over a wee bit. And I thought it would be good just to talk through my career. So how did I end up getting interested in data and statistics? How did I end up in the job I'm in? Why do I love the job I'm in? Because it's a great job to have. And then I thought I would spend a bit of time just talking about what Public Health Scotland does, and why data and analytics is so important to that. And then I've got a wee bit about, if you're applying for jobs with us, the types of careers we have, kind of things to think about when you're applying. And I've got a wee bit of audience participation as well, where I'll encourage you to put some stuff in the chat, but we'll come to that later on. So just a really quick bit about me. So I graduated back in 1994 from University of Edinburgh, so I did maths and stats there. Now when I did the course, there was only 5 of us who did the joint maths and stats degree, so it was quite a small class, and it's much different now. There's a much stronger stats presence in Edinburgh. And I have worked in the public sector for the whole of my career, so 26 years. I worked for the government, and then I've worked in the NHS for the last, it's actually 25 now, because I've just passed another milestone. And that's actually quite scary when you realise how long you've been working, because in my head I'm still in my 20s, so I don't quite know how that's possible. But I'm approaching the big 5-0, so I'm afraid it's real. And just to highlight, I'm also very active in the Royal Statistical Society, which is the kind of professional society for data and statistical people. And it's just something to highlight that if there are professional bodies that you can get involved in, they're really good ways of networking and kind of getting to know organisations and kind of understanding what's happening in the data and stats world. So just to highlight that it's a good thing, and it certainly helped me in my career. And I now work in Public Health Scotland. Just so you've got a sense of the scale of Public Health Scotland, it's about 1,100 staff, and we've got over 450 people who work in data and statistics. So there's quite a good career structure, really from new entry all the way through to chief exec. And in essence, that's what I've done. I started as a newish graduate. I've worked my way through the organisation to the role I'm in now. I'm a director in Public Health Scotland, and I'm also their head of statistics. I'll talk a wee bit about what that means later, but it's a great place to work. And sometimes what we find is when we talk to people, they don't appreciate the size and scale of the kind of data and stats part of the organisation. So it's great to be here talking to you about all of that. And a bit of a joke, us statisticians, we all have favourite graphs, so I've got a few favourite graphs, but one of my all-time favourites, which I've used over the years, this is a number of years old, but it's always really good, is how heavy was Scotland's heaviest baby? So just something to think about while I'm talking. Maybe you could put in the chat the answers in pounds. So how heavy do you think the heaviest baby in Scotland was? And this followed a genuine parliamentary question we got from the Scottish Parliament on the back of a news story about a really heavy baby born in Brazil. And there were concerns about the obesity crisis in Scotland, and people were really interested in heavy babies. So we have a database with all the babies that are born in Scotland and their weights, and we trawled it for the heaviest. So if you can just maybe put in the chat how heavy you think the heaviest baby was. And if we were doing this in person, you could win chocolate, but we're not in person. So just for pride among your colleagues, if you get anywhere near the right answer. And then just a wee bit about me. I was born in May 1972. I don't know if you recognise this picture, a wee bit blurry. This is Dundee, so I'm from Dundee originally, so I get really quite passionate about Dundee, which is great. But I was brought up in Carnoustie, so I'm kind of from the golfing town just up the road from Dundee. I don't play golf, though. I think that's one of the prerequisites. If you live in Carnoustie, you don't play golf. And I think it's probably because we couldn't afford to play golf because it's quite a pricey golf course. But it's a massive golfing community. So that's my background from the kind of east coast of Scotland. I'd always like to talk about my obsessions because people in Public Health Scotland know I have quite a few obsessions. I think it's a way to distract me from work, is get me obsessed about talking about one of my distractions. So I realise when I go through this, it makes me seem really, really sad as an individual, but I'm actually okay. So as a child, I got these kind of toys sit on tractors kids normally get. I had a bus, toy sit on bus, and I've actually been obsessed by buses ever since. So get me talking about buses, I'll be there all day. I'm a huge Doctor Who fan. I can still remember the first episode I saw, and I remember going to John Menzies in Dundee, if you remember that, the old kind of newsagent shop. It was a big newsagent shop, and I met Tom Baker, who was the Doctor at the time, and that is stuck in my memory as one of my oldest memories. So again, you can talk to me about Doctor Who forever. And I'm also a huge Eurovision fan. The first time I saw it back in '81 was when Bucks Fizz won. And I actually thought the UK won every year at that tender age. A really sad story, I actually met Bucks Fizz in a service station on the M6 in 2017. So many years later, my wife and I were sitting having our lunch, and I looked across and there was a big crowd of people, and I realised one of them was Mike Nolan, one of the singers in Bucks Fizz. And I imagined how he might look if he was 20 odd years older. And then when the crowd cleared, there was two females there, and I realised that was the other two singers in Bucks Fizz. So without thinking, I found myself walking across to them to introduce myself. And that way I suddenly realised I sounded like a sad 45-year-old saying, are you Bucks Fizz? I used to have your picture on my bedroom wall. Can I have your autographs? And there was that kind of uneasy silence when they were thinking, get this crazy guy away from us. So I hadn't really thought it through, but there we go. And it's a big standard joke. I've got quite a cheesy taste in pop music. My favourite are Steps. I've got tickets to meet them in November. So I get to meet the band, which is very exciting. And as Manira tweeted this morning, I've also got a love for Lego. So you can talk to me about any of these things, and that will distract me from anything to do with COVID or statistics. And then at school, I went to Carnoustie High. My favourite subject was maths. And just to be really honest, the reason why I ended up in the career I'm in is because it was my favourite subject. I had no plan. I just stumbled into maths because it's what I was good at school, and I thought I'll just go and do that at university. I was quite good at history as well and at art. That's a wee picture I drew for my higher art. I actually started out doing a maths and history degree because Edinburgh was the only university at the time that allowed you to do science and arts together. And then as a result of that, I stumbled on statistics. I'll come back to that later. And I had a summer job where I worked on the discovery of the ship in Dundee, and I absolutely loved every minute of all of that. And actually, at age 14, being given the role of speaking to people as a tour guide, actually really something that really helped my confidence in terms of being able to public speak and do all of that kind of stuff. So again, just getting opportunities to do that kind of weird thing is good. And back then I could sing. I can't sing now, so don't even ask me to start singing anything at all. And then just a wee interesting fact, our whole family is obsessed with the Antarctic. I would love to go there. My great-granddad actually went to the Antarctic with Captain Scott, so that's why we've got the huge obsession with Discovery in Dundee. And he's got a tiny wee island named after him because of the time he spent down there with them. So one of my ambitions in later life would be to actually go down and visit said island and go to the Antarctic. And then at university, as I say, I was there till '94. As I say, I started doing maths and history. I stumbled on stats in my second year. Absolutely loved the stats because it was really practical and hands-on. I remember having a project where we had to go and estimate the number of taxis in Edinburgh by going out a couple of times and counting taxis and numbers and all that kind of stuff. And it was just a brilliant course, really practical. And I hated the maths because it was so theoretical and unreal. I just had to get away from maths and then spent most of my time doing stats. So I graduated in '94. And then in those days, the norm was to start work. A few people did MScs or PhDs, which is more the norm now. and that's where my career began in the public sector. And then just to highlight some of my summer jobs, the Discovery, as I mentioned, and then I also had a couple of summers working for Lothian Buses in Edinburgh, counting money. And it was as dull as it sounds, but actually it was brilliant fun. The people were absolutely brilliant. And the sum total of excitement was they had these machines that counted the money. If you got a foreign coin, so a coin from Italy that broke the machine, that was really exciting because it clogged everything up and you had to try and work out how to get the coins out of the system. So a couple of years doing that. And then my ideal jobs wouldn't be what I'm doing now, although I love my job. I would love to run a bus company, or my ideal stats job would actually be compiling the top 40 singles chart. I'm obsessed with music and the music charts, so that would be a brilliant job, would be doing all of that. But these are all pipe dreams, and I am now doing the job of my dreams in the health service, which is the role I've got at the moment. And so just go over my early career. As I say, I started work at the Scottish Government. I had the grand title of consultant statistician, which was actually code for they weren't employing permanent people. So I was employed through an agency to do temporary work, but they gave us the grand title of consultant statistician. And you have no idea how scary that was as a new graduate, thinking, I'm not sure I can actually do this, to have the title of consultant. But it was great fun, and I was there for 18 months, analysing a whole range of data about schools, exam results and costs and all of that stuff. And I vividly remember my first Christmas night out with the Chief Inspector of Schools, and he made us drink one of each of the whiskies on the top shelf in this particular bar. And I have never, ever been able to face whiskey ever since that night. So note to self, don't be so foolish. And then I joined the health service in 1996, again 25 years ago, when I joined what was then called the Information Statistics Division. And it's morphed through various names over the years, but it's one of the organisations which joined Public Health Scotland in 2020. So that's where I've spent my whole career pretty much, in the health service. So I joined, as I say, ISD at the equivalent of what we called a band 6 today, so it's the level just above graduate. And I was analysing hospital data. And just to highlight, some of the data we've got does go pretty far back. So the main hospital data set, which is called SMR1, has been continuous since 1961. So you can just get a sense straight away of the huge richness of data we've got in Scotland, 50 odd years of some of the data sets. So the amazing things you can look at in terms of what's been happening with population health over that time is quite incredible. In those days, we were based in Trinity in Edinburgh. We're now out at the Gyle in Edinburgh, and in the centre of Glasgow near Central Station. And in those days, we only had 100 staff. Everybody knew everybody, but now we're much, much bigger. So it's been a bit more tricky to get to know everybody. In those days, we had offices. Then when we moved to the Gyle, it was all open plan, which was fine. And now the whole organisation is currently working from home, and we have been for the last 15 months. And that was really interesting because while we were in the office, we often used to say that we didn't think the IT would be able to cope with all the kind of analytical work we do from home. If everybody worked at home, how on earth could we do all this work from home? And then lo and behold, once we had to do it because of COVID, we discovered it did actually work. And really interesting, the problems we had 18 months ago was that we had far too many people based in our Glasgow office, and we were talking about buying new accommodation in Glasgow to accommodate everybody. But then along came COVID, and that now is no longer a problem. And I can't see a day where we'll all return to the office. So it'll definitely be a hybrid home and office working going forward. And just to highlight, Public Health Scotland has a sports and social club, and I've been chair of that since back when I began. So we're very, very active with the social activities, probably less about the sport, but more about the social stuff, which is good. So that's one of the perks of being working in Public Health Scotland. But just some things I remember from my early career. It makes me sound really ancient. I think I don't know if I said that in the previous slide. Actually, I met my wife actually when I was there. How could I forget that? So I shared an office with my wife. We worked together when we shared an office. I think she thought I was a bit odd because I put a poster of Janet Jackson up on the wall when I moved in. But we did get married 4 years later, and we're still together now. And we received the first Windows PCs in ISD. So in those days, people had black screens with green text and command lines and stuff that took days and days to run. And because we were the first ones with Windows, people would actually queue out in our office to come in and see them and actually experience a mouse for the first time. So it's quite kind of incredible. And then I led our transition from our old mainframe technology, which was really slow and would take days to run and had tapes and had to run in the background, to Unix, which we still use today, which is much, much faster. And we used a whole range of stats products, TPL, SPSS, and Fortran. And nowadays we're more into the territory of R, Shiny, and Python, but I'll talk a bit more about those. And I also led our work on the prep for Y2K, or year 2000, when we all thought everything would grind to a halt and stop working in the year 2000. And those of you who were around in 2000, I remember being out for the night celebrating the bells, and then we actually went back to the flats just in case the washing machine or microwave had mysteriously turned themselves on, because that was the kind of scare stories about stuff would just suddenly start failing. And of course, nothing happened, it all just carried on as normal. So I don't know if that's because of the prep we did rather than all the other stuff. And then I've held a variety of positions across ISD and Public Health Scotland. I've worked my way through the ranks, and I'm now a director in Public Health Scotland. And I've held that role for 7 weeks now. It's my newest job, which is really exciting. And then just to highlight what my role at the moment currently involves. So as I said at the start, I've got a dual role. So I'm a director, but I'm also head of profession for statistics. So as director, I'm accountable for all of our national data sets and assets. So we've got over 100 data sets we manage for the health service in Public Health Scotland. We've got around 300 data managers, statisticians, and project managers. My job has been massively directed towards COVID, as you would imagine, over the last 15 months. And just so you're aware of this, we keep having conversations about, when do we think it's going to be over? Do you think we can start scaling down some of the work on COVID? And I'm slightly scared now because we're starting to have those conversations now because the numbers are starting to go in the right direction again. And every time I have that conversation, they go back into reverse and it all becomes a bit of a nightmare again. So I think COVID's going to be around for a wee bit longer. And then I've got a big role in engaging with our key partners at the government, in the health boards, and in local authorities on a whole range of data and stats priorities and developments. And then just to highlight my head of stats role, so I'm basically responsible for the analytical workforce in Public Health Scotland, and the production of all our public-facing statistics has to follow what's called the Stats Code of Practice, which is a UK legislative requirement. So I'm just responsible in PHS to making sure we're complying with the law around all of that. And there is a stats regulator who keeps an eye on what we're all doing, and I have lots of conversations with them. And in fact, I'm talking to them immediately after this session. So if you see publicly any numbers about COVID, about health, the chances are they've come from Public Health Scotland. Just to quickly talk about the career structure, just so you've got a sense of the different types of role we've got in Public Health Scotland. So we've actually got three main job families that relate to kind of data and analytics. So the first column there, which is the analyst family, so that's information analysts or statisticians. It's just to highlight that we've got from new graduate, which is what we call band 5, that's the NHS pay scales, kind of all the way through to the kind of head of service and chief officer. And then beyond that, we've got the kind of director level jobs. But it just shows there's a kind of career path through that. We've also got a kind of project route, which is the middle bit, but it's projects related to data and analytics. So it's not project management in the kind of true sense of project management. It's project management with a data and statistics angle. So people who have those jobs come from data or statistical backgrounds rather than project management backgrounds. So again, there's a link from kind of new graduate, the band 5, all the way through to the kind of director level. And then we've got a separate stream on data management. So because of the size and scale of the data asset that we maintain, we've got jobs who are specifically responsible for managing the data infrastructure that we've got in Public Health Scotland. And we encourage people to move between job families. So if you come in as an information analyst, and you fancy being one of the information development managers, you can apply for posts in different families. You can do sideways moves, you can climb up different jobs. So there's a number of routes you can take. And that's why I think with having the kind of 400, 500 data and statistics kind of roles in the organisation, there's loads of scope for people to have careers that kind of match their own professional aspirations around what they'll be doing. So again, we can come back to that later if people are particularly interested in any of the roles. And just to highlight, the starting salary for new graduates is round about 25,000, which is, I think, reasonably competitive, but we are the public sector, so we are constrained a wee bit by kind of what we can offer. But just to highlight some of the terms and conditions, it's kind of 5 days a week, usually 37.5 hours, good annual leave. We operate flexible working hours, so you can build up time and then take time off. So you can build up to 2 days every 4 weeks, so you can kind of see how you can generate a fair number of additional days. We still have a pension, so it's an average salary pension scheme for new entrants. We've also got lots of family-friendly policies. So if you're at a stage in life where you're having a family and have children, or you're looking after more elderly parents or such like, then we have policies that can accommodate unusual working patterns to accommodate all of that. So you can choose, for example, to reduce your hours for a period of time, or to work a different pattern to accommodate your childcare or your caring commitments. So all of that is available. And if you want to have a career break, so go and do something else for a while, we encourage that because it helps broaden everybody's experiences. So you can do that, and then you can come back and work for us once your career break is over. So again, if you've got specifics about any of that, we can come back and talk about that later. So I want to just now move on, just talk a wee bit about Public Health Scotland, and kind of why we exist, why it's important, and what the role of data and analytics is, and kind of how we use it. And I quite like this kind of slogan we've got around the Together We Can. And one of the things that's really important for us as an organisation is that we don't try and do anything ourselves. So partnering with other people is really, really important. So partnering with universities, with other organisations, so that we can collectively do things that will genuinely improve the lives of the people of Scotland. So that's a big thing for us. And that's why it's great being able to reach out to organisations like the Tech Army and make the connections that we're making in sessions like today. And just to explain kind of why Public Health Scotland was created. So a lot of people think Public Health Scotland was created because of COVID. It wasn't. It's just unfortunate that we began pretty much the same time that COVID hit the UK. So it wasn't the year and a half that we thought we'd have as beginning in Public Health Scotland. And so we've had to adapt ourselves to living and coping with COVID. But one of the paradoxes that Scotland has is that it's actually got a pretty well-performing health service. So our health services are actually pretty good compared to benchmarks across the world. But we actually have some of the poorest health in the Western world. So one of the challenges is we've got a good health service essentially, but the people of Scotland are not the healthiest. Major challenges around mental well-being. There's major health inequalities across the country. So you really see really stark differences between affluent parts of the country and more deprived. And you'll all be aware of the challenge Scotland has with drug-related deaths. So one of the reasons for creating Public Health Scotland was actually to start addressing some of these kind of systemic challenges that we've got around our poor health in the country. And also recognising that there are challenges around funding for public services. There's been reductions over the years. There's kind of poverty in parts of the country. And all of that is accumulating an impact on how long people are living for. And we need to think about kind of how do we tackle some of that in Scotland. One of the interesting things about Public Health Scotland is that we have what's called dual accountability. So we're the first public body that is accountable to the government, to the Scottish Government, but also to local government. So we've got kind of two paymasters. So we serve effectively national and local. And it's seen as really, really important because one size doesn't fit all in addressing all of these problems. So it's really, really important that we work locally where we can to have the biggest impact. And that's a big feature for us. And then at the time, before we created Public Health Scotland, we were talking about keeping an eye on new and emerging diseases like this thing called COVID-19 in China. And then obviously COVID has hit, and it's had a massive impact on what we do in Public Health Scotland. So we've got loads of people working on COVID day in, day out. And for many of our teams now, we're actually 7-day working, just because COVID doesn't go away at the weekend. So we've got people working every day of the week to get the data out. So when you see all the COVID stats coming out for Scotland, they're all coming from Public Health Scotland. And then just in terms of the main focuses for us, linked back to what I've just been saying, at the moment, COVID is a huge focus. Mental well-being, a massive focus for us, and actually thinking through the impact of COVID on mental well-being, because it has had a big impact on people. Community in place, so again, just highlighting this need to be thinking locally. So kind of what is happening on the ground locally is very different across the country. So trying to think of that rather than the one-size-fits-all with a pan-Scotland approach isn't always appropriate. And then big things, as I say, about poverty across the country, and thinking about kind of getting the best start for children, because actually to tackle some of the longer term issues we've got, you really need to start with the children, because if they adapt, change their lifestyles, etc., by the time they get to older life, they'll be in a better position than some of the people in the population, obviously, at the moment. So those are the kind of things that we're doing at the moment. And just to highlight, I mentioned life expectancy. So just to kind of highlight why this is so important to us. So this is a trend over the last 100 plus years, and it shows the trends in life expectancy in countries in Europe. And it starts in 1900, and the red line is Scotland. So the average life expectancy in 1900 was around about kind of 40, 50 years in the country. And although we've improved, so it's now about kind of 74, 75 years. So it's a massive improvement over the 100 years. You'll notice that Scotland's moved from the middle of the pack to the bottom of the pack. And in more recent data, we're still seeing that levelling off. Scotland's still behind all the other countries. So we're really keen to kind of get underneath that to understand kind of what's happening in Scotland that's different to other parts of the world. And I talked about the importance of local geography, and this is kind of highlighted in this amazing graphic we've got that shows how life expectancy changes by travelling around stations on the Glasgow Underground. And you've got life expectancy in some of the areas to the east of Glasgow, where the life expectancy for males is 64 years, females 72 years. And by going around a few stations on the Underground and you get to the more affluent parts of Glasgow, life expectancy is some kind of 15 to 20 years better in those more affluent areas. So really, really stark inequalities across the country that we're really keen to work with communities to understand kind of what's behind all of that. And I know I lived in Edinburgh for a long time, and even just different sides of the same street could have very different perspectives in terms of life expectancy just by dint of where you were. So really, really important that we understand all of that. And of course, all of that we know because we've got great data in Scotland that can help us understand these questions and start thinking about what we might do to address them. And then the other great thing we've got in Scotland, I mentioned the hospital data going back to 1961. We've actually got data that goes from before birth, so our maternity data, I'll come back to the heaviest baby shortly, all the way through to death. And most of our data sets offer 100% coverage, so if it happened, we've got it. And in Scotland, we have something called the Community Health Index, which is a unique number we've all got. And that gives us the ability to link all of these data sets together so that we can understand pathways of care for at individual levels. But just to highlight, what's really important for us is data security, privacy, information governance. So although we've got data at individual level, the way it's analysed and managed, none of the analysts or data managers ever get anywhere near the actual named data parts. A lot of it happens behind the scenes, but the outputs you can get from having individual level data is quite incredible. And we've just published recently our new digital strategy, so that's worth a look at, and I can share the link with you afterwards, which kind of sets out our aspirations about how we want to be in terms of how we operate digitally, how we manage our data sets, how we work over the next 5 years. And we're really, really keen to embrace new technologies so that we work in different ways going forward. So again, I can talk more about that if you're interested later. And then I just wanted to touch on our COVID dashboard. So I don't know if any of you have used it, but we've got our daily COVID dashboard, which has had over 35 million hits since it was launched back in October. And we get about 200,000 users a day coming in to check out the COVID dashboard. So it tells you the numbers of cases each day and gives you trends over time in your local areas. So I thought I'd just share kind of why these stats are important. So this is East Lothian a month ago. I did a similar talk about a month ago. I'm in Tranent to the west of East Lothian, and white is pretty good, so that's pretty low numbers. And the darker the purple gets, the higher the COVID rates are in East Lothian. So back about a month ago, we were seeing some rises in the cases in the west of the region, and we think that was partly because Edinburgh, which joins East Lothian, was in a different tier to East Lothian, so our pubs were open later. And so what you start seeing is things like drifts from areas that are in different tiers, people moving into the other areas to make use of the facilities that are open longer. And before you know it, you start seeing COVID on the rise. And then this is the picture as of yesterday. So again, purple is not good. And you can see quite dramatically the whole region is pretty much bathed in purple. Although this is actually better than it was a couple of weeks ago when it was very, very dark purple across the whole region. So this is really good from a public perception to allow people the chance to understand what's happening locally in the areas and where COVID is. But from a planning COVID and how to respond to it, these types of images are used a lot by the services locally to plan their services. So where do you put community testing? Where do you target campaigns to encourage people to get tested or get vaccinated? All of this helps that. And for example, there's now a community testing site in Tranent where I live, because of our high levels of COVID at the moment. And all of these have been developed in R and R Shiny, pretty much in some cases overnight, because we've had to get this sort of stuff out into the public domain quickly. But it's also making us think about how we develop our products going forward, because the sheer reach of this dashboard has been unlike anything we've ever seen with any other statistics we've put out. So we're thinking about what is the future, what's the future dashboard equivalent of the COVID dashboard to try and help get the messages across about some of the other public health challenges that we've got. So if you like kind of graphics and mapping and all that kind of stuff, there's loads of opportunity to kind of use those skills in Public Health Scotland. So I'm going to just pause briefly to come back to my question about the heaviest baby in Scotland. So I've no idea if anybody's put anything in the chat, and if they haven't, I'm going to put Joanna on the spot to get her to guess what's happening. So Joanna, I don't know if I can't see the chat at the moment, so if you can maybe tell me if there is anything.
Yeah, we've got a good array.
Okay.
I definitely, I made sure nobody was Google checking first. So Andrew Sharkey, we have at £13 5 ounces. I said 16. I think Abigail also said 16. Chris at 14 and Morgan at £15.8.
Okay, so those are all pretty good guesses, but they're all way off.
God,
the heaviest baby in Scotland was actually £22. Now that always strikes a reaction in anybody who's given birth, because it's like, goodness gracious, how could that be? Now the reason thing was it wasn't even plausible. It was actually a data error in the data set. And the team at the time analysing it was entirely male. And we have a process whereby we sign out parliamentary questions. So it came to me as the head of the department at the time. So again, being a male, I haven't had kids, so I didn't know. I thought that seems okay. And then it ended up with our medical director, who at the time was a female, and she was like, there is no way on this earth it's £22. So we had to look at the data to try and understand what was going on. And this was the distribution over the previous kind of 20 years up to the point we did this. And you can see at the top, there's a curious run of £22 babies. Not many, but maybe about a dozen. It's like, how could that be? And there's a whole raft of birth rates between 12 and 14 pounds, which is where a lot of you were kind of going. So it was a data error. It took us a while to work out what was going wrong. But it shows, why I like this slide is actually it showcases some of the challenges you get with data. So no matter how good you think your data is, always beware of errors. And my own motto is never ever trust a maximum of anything, because usually it's wrong. And if we had ignored the kind of upper percentile of the data, we would have been more in the kind of 12 to 14 pound range, which is what you were all saying, which is, of course, sounds much more plausible. Now, the reason one time what happened is everybody talks about baby weight in pounds and ounces. Our data set actually records it in kilograms. So what we think had happened was that a 10-pound baby had been recorded as 10 kilograms, and 10 kilograms is 22 pounds. And because we were able to track it back, it was the same coding clerk in a particular hospital in Scotland who had all these heavy babies. So we think it's just been a coding error by the same person the whole way through. And so we think many of these heavy babies in the kind of 12 to kind of 16 are probably coding errors as well of 6-pound babies that have gone in as 6-kilogram babies. So the answer is we can't actually answer how heavy Scotland's heaviest baby is, other than it's probably about 12 to 14 pounds, because I don't believe these are all errors. But I just love that as an example of what can go wrong with data sets and things that you think are really clear in terms of guidance about how to complete it that are at odds with how we operate in society. So it's a really good one that I like. So that's I'm afraid none of you win a prize because you were all miles out, but it was a bit of a trick because it was actually a mistake. So there we go. So just briefly touching on coming to work for us, just to kind of highlight what we look for then in those 3 job families I was talking about. We look for people with analytical data or statistical skills. So as I mentioned, the project management jobs I was talking about, yes, project management skills are important, but it's also really important that you come with a data background. Experience in software, so we currently use R and Python and SPSS, although we're now phasing out SPSS because it will stop being available in a couple of years' time. And we're now much more in the spirit of using the open source software that goes with R in particular. And we share our code routinely on our website so people can use it, and we can use other people's code. So it's great to do that. But don't worry if you're not familiar with R or Python. We train people when they arrive in the use of those tools, but it is a good thing. And just to highlight, actually, we only moved to R because we had an influx of new graduates about 5 years ago who actually asked why we weren't using R, because they were all taught R at university. And the answer actually was because the management, and I include myself in that, we'd all grown up with SPSS and we hadn't used R because it wasn't available at university. So we hadn't actually thought about the fact there might be something different. And there was a real lesson for us about listening to the entirety of the workforce, because particularly newer recruits will have views and opinions about how we do things that we should listen to. So just to highlight that we do encourage people to speak up and help direct kind of how we do things, and we're very keen to move with the times. The ability to work in a team. So I realise particularly for newer graduates, if you've not worked before, it's hard to demonstrate that you've worked in a team. But if you've done team working whilst you've been at university, or you've got hobbies outside where you've worked, I don't know, you're a football team or you're a hockey team or anything like that, always good to kind of bring in these kind of personal things that you're doing out with your studies or your work. The ability to engage with people who have got little or no data or statistical experience. So one of the things we sometimes find is that people are really great on the data and the stats, and they can talk about that no problem. But we deal with a lot of people in government and in the health service who don't really understand data or numbers. So that ability to translate something that we think is relatively complex into something really simple that people will understand and be able to make decisions on. And that's been some of our challenge around helping people understand what is actually happening with COVID and what are the numbers actually telling us. Ability to work to deadlines, and that's really come to the fore at the moment with COVID. I used to joke that, I'd come in the morning and the deadline might be midday. Now it can be you come in the morning and the deadline's half an hour later because there's some urgent thing you did on COVID. So it's exciting, but it can be unexpected. And not in the lower grades, but as you move through the organisation, the potential we look for in people to manage or supervise staff and projects, that's really, really important. Willing to try new ideas. So this innovation bit I talked about, so that example of the R and using R was because staff highlighted that was a different way of working that could really improve our efficiency and be much more innovative, and that's what we did. And then the ability to present and have good visualization skills. And one thing I would say about visualization skills is kind of choosing the appropriate visual for what you're trying to get across. I think for a while, when we were first doing data visualization, we all became obsessed with a pretty picture rather than a picture that actually told the story. And the best bit of advice I ever got was, if somebody's looking at your image or your visualization, if they can start telling you the story of what that image is telling you within 7 seconds, then it's the right visual. If they can't do it, then you've overcomplicated it with graphics. And one of the examples I saw years ago was about, I think it was teenage pregnancy, and the image that we did was a really complicated image with baby bottles and lines on the bottle to show different trends. It was just a total confusing mess. And the actual trend, if you plotted a straightforward line graph, was a downward trend for the last 20 years. And the key message from the statistics was that teenage pregnancies have been falling for 20 years. So what we should have been using was the straightforward image that showed that downward trend, but we'd overcomplicated it with images with baby bottles and all sorts of stuff. So just a wee tip, kind of think about what you're trying to communicate and get that across as simply as possible. And then for your application, just some tips. We get lots of applications, particularly for the graduate entry levels. So really important you make yours stand out. And the best way to make it stand out is to keep it succinct. Now, our new application system forces you to do that because you're limited to a word count about what you can use. But it's really, really important. If you can kind of get your message across quickly and succinctly, that's really helpful, particularly for the panel who are plowing their way through 100+ applications. Make sure you bring out your strengths. So really important you do that. And if you've got strengths from things you've done out with work in your social or personal life, it's absolutely fine to bring those out in the application. And for each of the jobs, when you apply, you'll get the job description and you'll get what we call the person spec, which will describe the things we're looking for that are essential requirements of the job. Just make sure when you're filling in your application that you've ticked off all of the essential requirements, because we do use that as a way of filtering people if we've got lots of applicants. So just bear that in mind. And then when preparing for interview, you have to bring proof that you can work in the UK. And the reason why I just flag that is the interview can't go ahead unless you show us the proof that we need, so your passport or something like that. And there have been cases recently where we've had to halt the interview because the person hasn't brought their proof of eligibility. So it's a straightforward thing, but just making sure that you remember to do that. We tend to use competency-based questions, which is, give us an example of a time when you've done X. It's not hypothetical, it's about show us how you've done that. And what I would say in preparing for competency-based questions, don't agonize over what you think the questions will be, because you often can't second guess what a panel's going to ask. The best thing to do is just to write down maybe 7 or 8 really good examples that you've got from your experience. And then when you get asked a question, just think through which of those examples you've got would best answer the question. And I think sometimes what people can do in interviews, and I've been there before, is that you start overthinking it. And when you overthink it, you start over-preparing and making it really, really complicated. And then when you come to the actual interview, you don't perform as strongly because you bamboozled yourself before you started with all the potential things you could talk about. And you'll likely get a technical question, but please don't worry about the technical question. It's usually just something about, can you kind of summarize what you think the main findings in this stats bulletin are telling you? Again, if you're worried about that, you can phone up in advance of the interview and people can talk you through what to expect, but it's pretty straightforward. And then I like the STAR approach. I use it myself in interviews, thinking about the situation, the task, what you did, and then what was the result of what you did can be often extremely helpful. And then, as I said just a minute ago, just being able to explain your stats or data background to people who don't have a stats or data background. So often be somebody on the panel who doesn't have a stats background. And even those that do, just bear in mind that because this area is so vast, they might not be familiar with the area you're talking about. So it's really, really important that you can kind of convey simply what it is you've done and give us a sense of what that's like. I just to give you some examples of the types of things we might ask about is, so because some of our data, as I've highlighted with the heavy baby one, might not be 100% accurate, how would you explain the uncertainty in a data set to somebody in the health service so that they understand that there might be some data issues and that might impact on the conclusions they reach? Or a more straightforward thing, like if you're working at a median, how would you explain that to a journalist? So it can get down to kind of quite straightforward levels, but we often get phone calls, people say, I don't understand what you mean by a median, could you explain it to us? And so we'll just check that people are able to do some of that stuff. And then I mentioned I've been a member of the Royal Statistical Society for ages, so it doesn't really matter about the content of this particular slide, but just to highlight, actually being part of professional groups or societies is a really good thing. And again, if you are or you've done things like this, it's always really good to bring this out in your application, because it can also help kind of show that you've got connections out with your immediate sphere. And I've certainly found, since being a member of the Royal Statistical Society, that it's opened doors for me, because I've made connections with a whole lot of people that otherwise I wouldn't have met just within the kind of Public Health Scotland environment. And then just finally, some reflections on my career within ISD and Public Health Scotland. I'm going to say it's a great place to work. I've stayed there for 25 years. I wouldn't have stayed if it wasn't good. It's got a great career structure, got great people. There's a real opportunity to do work in data and stats that has a real impact on the people of Scotland. And one thing I would say about COVID is it's really put us on the map. So if anybody asks me who I work for, and I say Public Health Scotland, so you always get a look now of almost like, well, it depends where you are. You get usually admiration that you're working for Public Health Scotland, and that must be amazing. Or fear if you happen to be in a coffee shop or a restaurant, because they suddenly start, you clock them suddenly watching, have they got their face masks on, are they doing things right, in case we're inspecting them, which we're not. But it's really made a difference in terms of people understanding about Public Health Scotland. And before I worked for Public Health Scotland and we were in ISD, trying to explain to people what ISD did would usually take about an hour, and people would still be none the wiser about what we actually did, because now people really understand Public Health Scotland. I get it. I generally work with great people every day. I've got some amazing friends I've made over the years, got great colleagues. I met my wife, so although somebody did point out that I put her sixth on the list, maybe she should be first, but I met my wife, and we're still together, working together at PHS. We're also hot on work-life balance, and it can be easy to let work take over, particularly when it's busy, but the message is it's always busy. And if you let it, you'll end up working every hour of the day, and it's just not practical or sensible. So we are very hot on all of that. And particularly in the early COVID days, we had to kind of implement some rules about, appropriate times to send emails. So I discourage any emails after kind of 6:30 at night, because even if you kind of, I don't know, some people put the message on it saying, I'm sending this message to suit me, so please don't read it. But if you're a manager of an area and you've sent the message and people happen to have access to their emails, they're more likely to read it and check it, and then it's playing on their mind all night. So we try and encourage people not to do that and stick to working hours. And if you're on holiday, you're on holiday. So if we spot people replying to emails when they're on holiday, we will call it out to try and encourage people to take a break. So just to highlight, I think that's really important to me. It's also a good laugh in the office. So as I said, I'm a huge Steps fan. Steps released a new single today. It's currently number 2 in iTunes, because sadly I'm keeping an eye on it. One of my colleagues, I've been kept off by Ed Sheeran, and one of my colleagues has started an Ed Sheeran Appreciation Society today just to imitate me. So we have all that good banter that goes on whilst we're doing the work. And I think that's really important, because it's really busy. It can be a bit manic and stressful, particularly around COVID, but if you kind of have a laugh with people you're working with, and that includes people at government. We have good relationships with colleagues at the government. And then we've got, as I say, the Sports and Social Club that organises loads of things. And we're doing that as well virtually in COVID times, just to try and keep people connected while working at home. And then finally, I just like this slide, and Maria might have used it on her presentation because she likes it as well. And there's something about storytelling that's really important. So it's not just about reducing the numbers. We have to help people understand what are the numbers actually telling us, and what can we do because of those numbers. So that ability to storytell and make sense of what the numbers are telling us is really, really important and a key part of what we do. And then just to highlight, finally, we recruit all the time to all those jobs I just talked about. That's the details of where you'll find our vacancies. We've got a mailing list that you can get added to. And as I say, when we're advertising, there's a whole squad of people who will be very happy to talk to you about what the jobs mean, and whether your skills are a good fit or not with the organisation. And if you're worried about any aspects of the interview process, they'll help put you at ease about what to expect when you come through. I think that's my final slide. So I hope that's been helpful and it's what you were expecting to hear me talk about. If it wasn't, you can tell me what you thought I was going to talk about, and I can try and do that in the last wee while we've got together. And I realise, Joanna, I prattled on now for about 50 minutes without realising, but you see, I get carried away talking about all this stuff.
It's brilliant with gusto and enthusiasm. So much appreciation, Scott. Thank you so much for a really thorough tour of your sort of journey into Public Health Scotland. And I'm pretty sure a few people here will be joining the Statistical Society and all that kind of stuff, if not already. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask Scott? Go ahead, Andrew.
I probably have lots of questions, but they haven't quite distilled yet into sensible things. So, yeah, obviously I didn't know what to expect, and you didn't know what to expect, given your talk as well. But so you've obviously concentrated very heavily on the statistical side of things, on Python and R and data analysis. What about, and maybe this is a different department, what about ordinary dev jobs where you're just dealing with likes of the dashboard, coding the dashboard using React or a back end, or building the API, all that kind of stuff? Is that a different department from you within public health? Or are you responsible for everybody? Or oh, I can't hear you. You're muted.
I've got a mute. Damn it! That's the first time today I've done that. That's not bad. 1:30 and I'm on mute. No, so that's a big part of what the teams under my remit do, right. Andrew. So it's so most of the data that we put out now goes out in open format as well with APIs, so that others can use it and lift it. So I don't know if you're on Twitter and follow anything to do with COVID. There's a guy called Travelling Tabby who does better visualizations than we do, and he uses all our data. I'm quite happy with that. That's why we put it out there. So right. So part of, I guess, the engine behind it all is that we do all of that in the background as well. Mm-hmm. Now we do have a separate IT department, and IT is provided by another health board. So there's another organisation that provides our IT services. So they do a lot more of the kind of back end IT, but all of the kind of analytics and manipulation of the data and making the data available as APIs and all that kind of stuff sits with Public Health Scotland as well.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. I think I've probably actually seen your API, because I sort of programmed a mini COVID dashboard when I was doing my CodeClan course a couple of months ago now, and I ended up using the UK one because I couldn't figure your one out. But it's because I was a novice. It wasn't because your one was bad. The queries were quite complicated and things. And I thought the UK one actually has just got an endpoint that I can just lift. So I had to use the UK one and filter for Scotland, which I feel quite treacherous about. And so apologies for that.
The other good thing is we provide the data to the UK ones. They take it out of our API. It's a direct feed every day.
I thought that, yeah.
Do you know what? I honestly couldn't care. I think it's brilliant. As long as it's been used, that's the most important thing.
Aye. No, it's just the reason I'm asking as well is because obviously the statistical stuff did catch my attention, because I did have a previous life in maths, not statistics, but a bit of probability theory and pure mathematics. But I kind of abandoned that about 20 years ago, and I've had a strange career as a freelance musician for the last 2 decades. So I'm literally just coming back into sort of tech and mathematical things now, as a result of COVID. So your the Public Health Scotland is interesting, but there are so many little areas within that kind of interest me. I wouldn't know kind of what to apply for. I'm not a statistician, you know.
No,
I didn't do the data analysis course. I did the software development course at CodeClan. So
I think the thing to say is, don't worry about that. If I've occasionally drifted to the word statistician, that's because that's what I am. But you know, we tend not to use that word. It tends to be data analyst or data manager, the two things. The one thing I would say, Andrew, is we recruit generically. So we've got one job description covers the analyst. So for say the new graduate entry level, there's a job description for all the analyst roles. So it's one job description that covers all the analyst roles. one job description that covers the project roles and one job description that covers the data roles, but within that there are a whole myriad of opportunities, and what we would try and do is place people where their skills are in the organisation.
Okay.
But we would also think about with you actually potentially then later on, maybe within a year or two, deliberately putting you where your skills aren't, so you can develop the skills, because there's much about playing to your skills, but actually getting new ones as well. So don't worry if you've got a particular area of expertise, that's more than covered by the genericness of what we're recruiting. And that's kind of what I was meaning by the whole data stats analytical space is so vast. You know, people come with different skill sets and very specific areas. That's fine. And then what we'll do our best to do is map you to where we can apply that in PHS, and then how to make sure we're developing you then to get the best out of you going forward.
Sure. Yeah, sounds like a great place actually.
Right, it is. I'm biased though, obviously. I think it was Marina always says, if you saw Marina when she spoke a couple of months ago, she at that time before she joined us, I think only stayed in places for a couple of years. She very much moved around, and she stayed, and she's been here for 7 years, and she just says it's testament to the organisation actually that she wants to stay rather than go elsewhere. So it's good.
And it is another excellent talk actually, Andrew, that can watch on, sort of catch up as it were, if you're interested.
Okay, yeah.
I'll share that with you afterwards. Any other questions?
Yes, I've actually got 2 questions. So the first one was, did you get the autograph? Because you didn't actually say.
Oh, I did get the autograph.
You did? Well, at least it was
I didn't get a selfie though. I think the look of horror on their faces when I went over to them, I thought, I need to retreat quickly from this.
Right. Okay, so it was worth it. So actually the more serious question was actually about the map you showed of East Lothian.
Yeah.
And I remember when East Lothian went down 1 and Edinburgh remained, was it 3, I think it was.
Yeah.
Because I'm quite close to the border with Musselburgh, and I remember seeing this article where was it actually the Mayor of Musselburgh, whatever the guy is, actually was just like, people in Edinburgh stay away, and I was just so offended. I was just like, fine, I'm never coming back to East Lothian ever again. But looking at it, I get the part of it where they were saying that basically East Lothian was being penalised by Edinburgh because it's basically an invisible line between end of Edinburgh and and say, for instance, like I'm saying, I'm closer actually to Musselburgh than I am to the city centre. But then look, so I guess that bit at the far west bit makes sense. But then also you could see dark bits of Haddington, and then again at Dunbar, and especially Dunbar stayed dark when everything else had gone a bit lighter. And I was just wondering, this is just me doing this from cycling a lot through East Lothian, and I love it because they're all the back roads that the cars ignore, so you're less likely to be used as target practice. But I know Haddington is quite big, and having actually just done Dunbar, this week or last week, it's not quite as big as Haddington, it looks like, but it does cover a fair bit, and you're getting tons of tourists and stuff like that. Would that be kind of what's getting T spikes, very obvious spikes that aren't going down?
And probably to be clear, I was a wee bit tongue in cheek when I was blaming Edinburgh. What wasn't?
Oh no, I said that because
it's partly what I said that. No, but it's a really good point, because so what essentially happens is so behind the scenes we've got a whole lot of people who do what's called contact tracing to understand what's causing the cases in each of these areas and where have people been and kind of what's been happening. And it's really interesting because so you get the sense of, okay, there's been drift from neighbouring areas, and that's why when they're setting levels they look at kind of what's happening elsewhere. And there was worry about the islands, I think, for a while. If islands were in a lower level, would people travel and what would happen? But for example, there was an example of, I think it was 4 coach loads went down to Wembley to watch Scotland play England from East Lothian, I think from Musselburgh in fact, but they would have been from different parts of East Lothian. And every single person pretty much on that coach, all those 4 coaches, came back positive. And so immediately you start seeing they'll spread out over different parts of East Lothian because they live in different places and be in contact. So what's really important of the kind of data we've got is you start seeing, okay, it's starting to spread out, what's going on, and just trying to understand it all. So there's a whole load of kind of stuff behind it. And where we start getting really twitchy is if you can't work out where it's coming from. So we quite like it when you find 4 busloads of people, because you think, right, we've now pinpointed what's happening. But if you didn't know that, that would then suggest there's much more widespread community spread, which is a worry. What we're seeing now is across the whole country is the rates are all going back down. And that'll be for a whole variety of reasons, whether it's vaccinations, it's holiday time, it's warmer, the football's over. Yeah, I think we've never been so glad that Scotland got knocked out of Euros. It's the school holidays just now in Scotland, so people are not mixing as much as they were. So there'll be an interesting point after August the 9th if the First Minister makes a statement about kind of going back to normal. Will we start seeing numbers rise again, or what will happen? So you probably would believe the forensicness at which we look at all of this every day to work out what might be happening. So yes, that's the kind of thing that we look at, and to try and answer those very questions you're answering, kind of what the heck's going on and what's behind it all.
Okay, cool. No, it was just the fact that it was very, very obvious spike that wasn't going down when everything else had dropped, and I just thought, well, I can see Dunbar being a tourist hotspot, and that would make sense. I wouldn't say Haddington was probably the biggest tourist hotspot on the planet, but I guess I don't know if it's just the size of the place that might be something to do with why that would be a hotspot.
Yeah, and no, I don't know the answer, but that's the kind of thing that our teams will be looking into, as to kind of what's going on there. The other thing to say is the map, because it's plotted by geography, there's lots of rural bits of East Lothian, so it can, some vast swathes look like they're clear of COVID, but they are because they're trees.
Well, yeah, I know that was my point about the reason I kind of picked those out was the reason I like cycling in East Lothian is exactly as you're saying. It's tree and tiny little roads that cars do not like, and farmhouses. So that kind of makes sense. And I guess that was why the other bits stood out. So actually, partly what I was wondering is I do know there are a few other smaller bits around, little villages quite close to Haddington, which may explain why it's a bit more spread out and you've got more of the empty bits. I probably need to go look again at the map too. But okay, cool, thanks. Yeah, that's actually quite interesting with the busloads bit as well.
So Scott, I've got a question. Thanks so much. That's a really, really interesting talk and really good background to what's going on. When you're recruiting for roles that aren't necessarily graduate roles or people with more experience, and certainly in other industries or other areas, how do you sort of onboard them into a health background? So I would be coming, if I was interested in applying, I'd be coming from a very much a finance background. Is that something that you take on board, or is there a particular skill set you're looking for rather than necessarily the industry?
Yeah, so it's a really good question actually. So the kind of experience of the health service, I mean, it's helpful, but it's not essential. So if you've come from a completely different background, but you've got the kind of data and analytical skills that we're looking for, then absolutely apply for the level that's appropriate to you. So, and then when you arrive, you would be kind of on board. There's loads of induction about the health service, kind of what we do. And then depending on the team you're in, the teams tend to specialise in particular areas. So you'll be brought up to speed in that particular team with that particular topic area. So all of that happens. So I would encourage you, by all means, apply for the higher level jobs. That absolutely. And we're actually really keen that at all levels we bring in kind of fresh blood, as well as opportunities for internal candidates to get promoted. It's really good if we've got new people coming in just to keep us on our toes and be fresh and make sure we're doing the right stuff. So yeah, please do that.
Right, brilliant. I'm conscious of time now, and I'm pretty sure we could keep picking your brain, but you've been really generous with time, Scott. And thank you, everybody. It's great to hear a real myriad of different questions. So thank you, guys. And brilliant. Hopefully we'll persuade you to come back, and I'd want you to talk about Lego, but
I could do a whole hour on Lego. Don't get me started on that.
And I'm sure there's a whole road of other bits and pieces, but yeah, thank you. Brilliant talk, really, really well delivered. So thank you.
Okay, no, just to say a huge thank you to you all for coming along, and it's been really great. Thanks for having me along. Really enjoyed it. And actually, it's a real pleasure to get to do something like this rather than some of the other nonsense that's currently clogging my diary. So it's great to to not just be devoted to COVID all the time. So thank you very much, and I hopefully see you all soon.
Brilliant. Thank you, Scott.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very
See you all
much.
later. Thanks. Bye.
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 Thank you, guys.